Welcome everyone. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you all for being here at Valencia, and we will continue to work with you all and have more and more students coming in. So as Jeff mentioned, I teach in a business, the Bachelor's of Applied Science in Business and Organizational Leadership, but we're going to dive right in. So how many of you are emotional? Everyone in the room should have their hand raised. We all deal with emotions, right? We stereotypically say that women are more emotional, right? But if anybody's ever worked with an all-guy team or all-male team, you know men are just as emotional, just in very different ways, right? How many have struggled with some type of emotion, not knowing how to deal with it, not knowing how to do things with it, etc.? Okay. Well, this is one of my favorite quotes. Buddha said, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Now, no one in this room would drink poison and expect the other person to die, and yet we allow our anger, in business and otherwise, to often spoil our day, our hour, our week, our month, our year in some cases, right? When we talk about our employees leaving or retention issues, some of this might come into play. Right? So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is a set of skills in which we deal with the outside world. Right? It determines how well we cope with the demands and pressures of our everyday. It helps us understand ourselves. It helps us empathize with others, draw on our inner resources, and encourage the same qualities of those around us. That's what emotional intelligence is. So if you've ever been driving on I-4, you've had to implement some emotional intelligence. Why is that person driving with their blinker on 30 miles after they made the turn? Or, why didn't that person let me into traffic, or all the other things that we might say, right? On I-4 traffic. But in business, how well do we cope with the demands and pressures? Right? Who has deadlines they've got to meet? Who has had an employee fall through on what they said they were going to do at the 11th hour? Right? How do you deal with it? Do you scream and yell? Sometimes, right? Do we fire them? Well, sometimes. Can we scream and yell and fire every single time someone messes up? Probably not. Not unless we have a really good recruiter that's just bringing people in constantly, right? But again, that costs money. So, number one, self-awareness. We have to become more self-aware of why we're feeling the things we are. So, when we are angry, or we're happy, or we're sad, we're frustrated, do we understand what we did to bring about that emotion? Do we have absolutely no idea? I have a 10-year-old son. I have two sons, one 10, one 8, and a 5-year-old daughter. And by far, my daughter is the toughest one of the three. No doubt about it. But my 10-year-old has a lot of difficulty accepting personal responsibility for things. Right? He loses his sneakers 3 times in the same morning. Like, he has no idea where his sneakers could be, right? He's got to get the bus in 10 minutes, and he'll literally lose his sneakers 3 times in 10 minutes. And he has no ability to think about the personal responsibility. Do we have people in our workplace currently that kind of can exhibit some of that? Do we ourselves sometimes not accept or not understand what our personal responsibility is in a conflict or a situation that's going on? Also, our self-motivation, discovering self-motivation, right? So we feel a lot of things all the time. Right now, we're probably feeling a little hungry, maybe a little tired, right? What is our motivation for feeling the way we do? There are some things in your daily life that if they happen, they're no big deal to you. But the person sitting next to you, if it happened to them, the world would collapse. Right? It's all relative. But understanding why something upsets you to a greater degree or makes you happy to a greater degree is understanding what is your motivation for it, right? Your hot button items, your hot, the hot push your buttons, etc. Right? Mastering self-management. So how do you manage your emotions? You know, when something happens, you know, if I walked in here today and I stubbed my toe, me going, would be pretty normal. But if I came in here and I stubbed my toe and I flipped over a couple tables and punched Jeff in the face, that's probably not good self-management, right? And obviously in the workplace, that's not going to go very far, right? I don't think I would be back with you all anytime soon if that happened. So understanding how you manage yourself. And then employing interdependence. What this concept is basically, especially when it comes to EQ, is realizing that everything is connected. So when the boss comes into work and is angry and pissed off, it affects the rest of the team. Likewise, if you've got an employee that comes in and they're really upset about something, it affects the rest of the team. Everything's connected, right? And so understanding that because everything's connected, it's important to put in mechanisms in your workplace to understand that and to address those issues. And oftentimes it's as simple as talking about it, talking about what's going on, what's happening, etc. You know, sometimes I know the job has to get done, but sometimes if someone is really not in the right state of mind, it's better to send them home for the day than to have them continue the job in a negative way. Right? I know it costs money, and I know it's difficult to do, and everyone's got deadlines and so forth, but you actually will do more damage sometimes by having that negative person or the really sad person or whatever. As we continue to evolve as people, as human beings, emotional intelligence is the understanding that our emotions have effect on us, and they should have effect on us. The other piece, how can we use self-awareness? Well, one, we can manage our relationships better. Not just our personal relationships, but also our work relationships. What does that look like? What does that not look like? How can we motivate people that work for us, work with us, to do a better job, to care more, etc.? Some of it comes down to relationships and how we manage those relationships. The beautiful thing about emotional intelligence is it can be worked on. Unlike IQ, which is basically set, pretty standard, emotional intelligence can be honed in, it can be continued to develop. So by adopting an image of lifelong learning, the ability to continue that learning, like you all are doing here, that's why you all are here. So we don't need to preach to the choir, but understanding that you can continue to learn more and better effective techniques in emotional intelligence. And then ultimately believing in yourself, right? No one in this room is here because you don't believe in yourself. No one is a CEO or CFO or C-suite or an owner of a company unless at some point you said, you know what, I can do it. But helping your employees understand that they also can do it, whatever that looks like, is a really big piece to the emotional intelligence. I'm going to show you a quick video of someone who didn't have, in his career, didn't have necessarily the best emotional intelligence or self-management. And it goes on from there. Those of you that were around when John McEnroe was playing, he became, unfortunately, much more well-known for these kind of outbursts than he did for his athleticism or the fact that he was a famous tennis player. And when I show students that video, I have to explain the significance of him lashing out that way. But that is not something that's commonly done in tennis, right? We don't see that kind of behavior very often. Think of the times you've seen that kind of behavior, or worse, in the workplace. If you're ever bored, Google fast food fights. If you ever get bored. There's literally thousands of videos of people getting angry because they stopped serving breakfast, or they ran out of chicken sandwiches at Popeyes, and they fight the people behind the counter. Right? This is not good self-management. Right? These are not things, obviously, we want in the workplace. But they happen. You know, how many people in here have ever lost their temper? Yes, everyone in the room has lost their temper at some point in time. Said something maybe you shouldn't have said, so forth and so on. What we want to try to do is decrease those instances. You know, wouldn't it have been great for John McEnroe to not have all those outbursts? We probably wouldn't really, I mean, to be honest, for him, we probably wouldn't know who he is nowadays, right? Now it's become a big joke. He was in Adam Sandler movies, and he's in commercials all the time, kind of joking about the fact that when he was young, he was crazy. But wouldn't it have been nice? I mean, wouldn't it have been nice to have devoted his entire career to something and be known for that, instead of the fact that he was somewhat crazy on the court? I mean, think about it in your own workplace. You know, do you want your employees to think of you as a person that comes in like a tornado and gets everyone all riled up and crazy, right? You want to be the Gordon Ramsay of your industry.
Works for him.
Yeah, it has worked for him. But I don't know. But you've got to have a lot of skill to back it up, I suppose, don't you? So here are 4 factors of emotional intelligence. When we boil everything down, it comes to these 4 things. How do we perceive emotions? Do we accurately perceive the emotions of those around us? Right? So when we're engaging our employees, do we have an accurate perception of what they're feeling, what they're emotionally feeling? Or do we not? Right? The more times that we're completely off the mark might indicate that we have some work to do in that area. You know? Some people laugh when they're really nervous. Some people cry when they're really angry. Do we understand what those might mean in the workplace? You know, so how well do we perceive others' emotions? How well do we reason our own emotions? Prioritize what emotions to respond to. Right? So we feel emotions a million times a day from all different directions. How do we prioritize which emotions we deal with most? Right? So if I walked in here today and I stubbed my toe, but then I find out that Valencia gave me a raise, am I angry still that I stubbed my toe, or am I happy that I got a raise? Well, a rational person, someone that has probably a high EQ, would be pretty happy they got a raise, right? Some people, though, unfortunately, would still be upset about the stubbing of the toe, right? You might know some people in your workplace that if they get cut off in traffic in Orlando, which is pretty much an ambiguous thing that's going to happen every single time you drive in Orlando, it ruins their entire day. They just can't get past it. They take it as a personal insult to them. That's not good prioritizing of what emotions to feel. Also, understanding your emotions. Why are you feeling that way? As I mentioned earlier, there are some things that could happen to you today that will be no big deal. But the person sitting next to you, it would be the end of the world. Right? It's because we all come from different walks of life. We all come from different experiences, different life experiences, etc. And so understanding why we feel a certain way about a particular thing is really useful. How many of you had a random roommate at some point in time in life? Or you maybe in college, or you had to move in somewhere, and you had some people that you had to live with, and you didn't really choose, right? Understanding these emotions is really important in that situation, because for me, all of my random roommates, there was things that they can do that would really upset me, and other things didn't bother me at all. One of the things that really upset me is dirty dishes in the sink. Why did it upset me so much? Because it's disgusting, and that's incredibly rude. But more importantly, it's because when I was a child and I was growing up, my family always made me do the dishes at the end of every meal. That was my big chore. That and taking the dog out, right? And so that's what I was programmed to do. And so that was my big thing. Them not making their bed didn't bother me at all. My household, the bed not being made was not a big deal, right? I lived with someone was the exact opposite. His big item was if I didn't make my bed in the morning, but he didn't care if he had a science experiment going on in our kitchen sink. I mean, literally, he would leave dishes there for weeks on end, and stuff that the plates would grow legs and start to walk around the counters is what it looked like. It was terrible. Well, we didn't last very long as roommates together. But in the workplace, what are those buttons for you? Right? Some people never return phone calls. It's not a big deal for them not to return a phone call. They'll see you next week. No big deal. They'll bump into you next week and they'll be like, "Did you get my message?" Yeah, I got your message, but Some people, if you don't get back to them within 6 hours, are really upset, right? Some people think an email is just basically a bulletin board. And they send you off an email, and at some point you'll see it, no big deal. Some people expect you to answer the email immediately, right? Same thing with text. My students, very few of them have my cell phone number. But when I do give students my cell phone number, we have a conversation about when is appropriate to text me, when isn't it appropriate to text me. I have a wife and a family and 3 kids. I'm also an older person, which means I need to go to sleep at a normal time. And so texting me at 1 o'clock in the morning is not good, right? And they're like, well, don't you just put it on sleep or silent? Because in their world, like they're up at 1 o'clock in the morning, or their world, they silence their phone. And so, but I'm like, no, I've got responsibilities. I can't silence my phone. What happened? I've got family and all these other people. If I silence my phone, I won't get messages, right? Same thing within the workplace. What are the things that you care about, the things you don't care about? And then the last one is managing your emotions, right? The John McEnroe video, if the line judge is calling the wrong, what he perceived as the wrong calls, expressing that and dealing with that is probably appropriate. Doing it the way he did, where he's throwing the racket around, and he almost, in the video, we didn't have time to see the whole thing, but in the video, the second time he hits the cups actually fly over his opponent's head, and the opponent has to duck underneath them. And he ends up losing an entire game as a penalty for that, right? How many games have we lost because we didn't manage our emotions? Or did our employees make us lose because they didn't manage their emotions? I'm going to show you another video of a situation in which all of these come into play. There's got to be some perceiving of emotions. There's got to be some reasoning, some understanding, and then managing. And you've probably seen this scenario play out either in your personal life, but I want you to try to think about it in your professional life. When have you been the male? In the video I'm going to show you, when have you been the male, and when have you been the female characters in this scenario?
snack, I mean, all of them.
If you would just
Don't.
So how many times have we been one of those two characters? Certainly in our personal lives we've probably been that, but also we've probably been one of those two characters in the workplace as well. Where, you might be the senior person, you might be the veteran, you might know how to do whatever it is that needs to be done, and the easiest thing for you to do is just tell them, this is the way you're supposed to do it, this is the way it's supposed to be done. And the other person doesn't want to hear that, right? They want to learn how to do it their own way. All right, and so we have this kind of breakdown in communication, where you're perceiving the emotions maybe a little wrong, maybe they're perceiving the emotions a little wrong, not reasoning properly or managing the emotions, right? The male character in this, obviously this is a personal relationship, but a male character in this is just kind of dumbfounded because he's got the solution, right? And if she just listened to him, the solution would be done and they'd be solved, right? But she doesn't want the solution per se. She just wants to be heard. Well, in the workplace, it's the same thing. How many people have had to deal with a disgruntled client or customer at some point in time, right? And within 30 seconds of them talking to you, you know exactly how to fix whatever the problem is. And you have the solution. But they don't necessarily want to hear the solution until you've heard them all the way through. Right? How many people have been in that situation before? It's the same situation as it's not about the nail. Sometimes they just want to vent. Right? And if the relationship is important, you let them do it. Even if you have the solution much, much faster. Right? That's emotional intelligence. Why is it important for the workplace? In the workplace, this is what happens when you have low emotional intelligence. And it goes not only in terms of retention with talent, but also recruiting talent. Right? If you have low emotional intelligence, the people that are going to be recruiting and talking to your potential candidates are not going to be people that you want necessarily to be those people that are doing that. But if you have overall low emotional intelligence in the workplace, what you see is people playing the role of the victim, not taking personal responsibility. How many people have heard from an employee at some point, that's not my job. That's not my job. That's low emotional intelligence. When everyone starts finger pointing at somebody else, that's where you have the problems, right? And ultimately, if everyone says that's not my job, then the job doesn't get done, and then what happens? You lose a client, you lose a customer, you lose money. Having passive or aggressive communication styles. Passive aggression is my favorite in my dystopia movie in my head. Like, passive aggressive is the worst for me. But that's the communication style you have, right? And you get emails sent all around. Everybody's copied on them. Don't you love those emails? Those kind of borderline angry, kind of bitchy emails, and everybody in the world is copied on them. That's the kind of stuff you have. Refusing to work as a team. There is not a company around in this room or anywhere else that doesn't have to operate as a team. Right? And whether it's in professional sports or anywhere else, if it doesn't matter how great your people are, if they can't work together, you're not getting anything done. In low IQ, they just won't work as a team. Right? And every job is interdependent upon another job. Doesn't matter if you're in catering, in pest control, in technology, everyone that works for your firm or your company is connected to everyone else at some level. And then lastly, being overly critical of others and not open to others' opinions. How many times have you sat around in a room, not necessarily in your company, but in maybe another previous job you had or so forth, where they say, okay, give us some thoughts, give us some opinions, and no one says anything. Why don't they say anything? Well, maybe because no one listens. Nothing ever gets solved from that, etc. But some of the greatest ideas, as the panel mentioned earlier, are going to come from the most unlikely places. Right? It's going to be your frontline people, the people that are doing the day in, day out work, that might have the best ideas. So forth and so on. So in high IQ, EQ places, rather, workplaces, what you have is you ultimately make better decisions and solve problems. People feel more comfortable being vulnerable. They feel more comfortable sharing their weaknesses. And in those situations, we can create better solutions for whatever we're looking at. People tend to keep cooler under pressure. Why? Because they understand why they're feeling a certain way. They feel like their voice is heard. They feel like their emotions are validated, etc. You resolve conflicts. I've worked some places where there was a conflict that happened so long ago. It was like the Hatfields and McCoys. No one knew exactly why that department and that department didn't like each other, but everybody knew that they didn't like each other. And the dysfunction that would yield, monumental, right? You also have greater empathy. You know, one of the things that will not be replaced by machines is our empathy. The fundamentals of business are never going to change. It's always going to be people doing business with people, and empathy is a huge piece of this, right? And what you all are trying to do is solve some type of pain point for your customers, right? It might be termites, it might be food for an event, it might be some technology thing, but you're trying to solve some problem that your customer is experiencing. No one buys your products or your services because they don't have an issue or problem they want solved. They come to your company and they engage with your company because you're going to solve some type of problem for them. You have a solution for them. The only way you actually know that problem and know that solution to be solved is through empathy, through empathizing with them and understanding what their issue is, right? And the companies that do it well are going to be very successful. The ones that don't are not going to be very successful. In my neighborhood, we have a lot of old growth trees up in Lake County where I live. And so at least once a week, I get a flyer on my door of tree removal, tree trimming, tree removal. I guess my trees look horrible. I don't know. I think they look okay, but apparently not so much. And the flyers that I read, maybe it's my position in the world and what I do as a job, 90% of them are absolutely horrible. They talk about how great their cutting mechanisms are, and they talk about how great their employees are, but it's not anything about my problem, right? And so when I hired someone after hurricanes a couple years ago to trim my trees, it was the person that came over, and their flyer and their kind of spiel was all about, you know, you really want to move this, trim that branch, because if it falls, it's going to hit this part of your house, and you're going to have issues and so forth, right? It's just a simple example. And then ultimately, listening, reflecting, and responding to constructive criticism, realizing that everyone can get better. Your best hire is the best day one, but day two, they're not the best anymore, right? So if you hire someone and you don't talk to them, you don't look at them, you don't interact with them, you don't send them to any professional development, you don't work with them, you don't do any of these things, 3 years later, they're no longer the best. They were the best maybe to day one, if you had a good mechanism for recruiting and so forth. But if you just leave them on solo, they're no longer the best. But at the same time, we're no longer the best.
One of the things we're doing, and Agnes is to be congratulated here, because internal training in our organization is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what she's having done is when we had CPE for everybody, and it's a 60 or 90-minute thing. Well, the lower level staff are required to present, right? And the really good thing about it is that she will take the time to meet with them in advance, prepare them, and then they actually do it. So you have 20-somethings that are doing this, and it's really quite good. So
Yeah.
it's that type of thing that in any organization, you have the younger people it feels like, it's not day one, it feels like they are gonna go from day one to day two to day three, and they've got a function that's in the public eye in that office.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's literally what is happening here. It has made a diverse company, right? Okay, where not a whole lot of conversation occurs, you know, inside. I mean, we have 36 people in that office, and it's pretty quiet when it's busy, right?
It is, but it's honestly, it's most people like, ooh, God, I got this or whatever, but the staff have really actually enjoyed it.
Mhm.
They get some time to get, 15, 20 hours to prepare for a presentation that they're not hitting a client for, they don't have to worry about their time. It's,
Mhm.
I just need to be prepared and dig in.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
really enjoyed that process and just the learning process.
Mhm. Well, and it's that peer-to-peer learning as well, right?
Yeah.
And it prepares them for client presentations down the road and so forth because they get more time in front of people. We all know that the number one greatest fear, study after study, is public speaking. Even more so than death. So the old joke is that most people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So how do you get better at public speaking? Speak publicly. Yeah.
I think this is getting more and more important. Latest study from Harvard and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon shows only 15% of the business success is on hard skills, 85% on this skill. Empathy is one of the most important things. Next thing is listening to learn rather than listening to reply.
Yes.
Majority of us are already available my reply.
Yep.
You can focus on listening to learn.
Yeah, listening to learn, absolutely. I mean, because think about the people you do business with, right? Not only your companies, but even in your private life. They're companies that you have some type of attachment to that you feel do a better job than others. Because we have way too many choices. I mean, you name any industry, there's at least 15 competitors within a hop, skip, and a jump of your house, of your shop, right? So why do your customers work with you? It's the same reason why you hire and work with other people, right? A lot of it comes down to emotional intelligence, your empathy, etc. We could hopefully maybe talk about this another time as well, but there are some things you can do to foster greater empathy. Number one is become more self-aware. So really kind of thinking about when you have those anger moments, whether it be in the car or in the boardroom or what have you. Why are you feeling the way you are? What are your emotional strengths and weaknesses? There are things that people can do in my life that it doesn't matter to me. But there's other things that people can do that really upset me, like the dishes in the sink thing. Now, in my workplace, that doesn't happen too often because we don't have any sinks with dishes. So I'm okay. But understanding where those lie. Also improving your social skills. Again, listening to actually learn and not just reply. So often in life, as you mentioned, we just listen to reply. The problem is a lot of times we'll miss the actual message that the person's trying to communicate to us. And in business, that could be the difference between a sale or an ongoing relationship and it walking out right out the door. Pay attention to nonverbal communication. Most of our communications, especially are around our emotions, are nonverbal. So facial expressions, body language, etc. A lot of times when I coach people that are going to go into interviews, I coach them on their nonverbals, right? Because they might do this thing a lot, right? What is that conveying?
Defense.
Could be defense, protection. Maybe they're just tired of keeping their arms like flopping and they don't know what to do with them. But it's all messages, right? That's why eye contact is really important and all the rest of the things. Yes, sir.
Isn't this a lot about mental health and how companies encourage personal development around mental health, behavioral health, and avoid the stigma, deal with the stigma of all this? I mean, because, how do people teach this in the workplace? It's either going to be through a counselor or therapy or HR but it's one-on-one learning what your particular behavioral issues are and where they come from and learn how to have self-awareness and deal with them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly an aspect of this that has a lot to do with mental health. But I don't think every workplace can increase in emotional intelligence only through mental health counseling. I think that's an aspect of it. But I think more so it's about encouraging and fostering a environment in which people understand that their emotions come into play and that their emotions are very real, one way or the other. Our emotions are inherently not bad or good. It's what kept us alive, right? It's our fight or flight response and so forth. So in of themselves, they're not necessarily bad or good. It's how we operationalize those emotions that matter. I think I think if you have an EAP program and so forth that offers mental health, or an insurance plan that offers mental health, and make that available to employees. Try to destigmatize that. Put up signs and so forth. That would be good. And then more so, I think it's really modeling the way yourself and how you deal with your own emotions and then the emotions of others.
How do you go about suggesting, obviously some people are better at it than others, and it gets out of control in some instances, so how do you as a business owner legally and the right way to refer them to an EAP program?
Yeah, so I'm not an attorney or nor an HR specialist. So if there are folks in the room that are either of those, please. The way that I would do it, I would not recommend someone go to a mental health counselor per se, but I would make sure that we have very stated and clear kind of duties and responsibilities and work ethics and etiquette kind of posted and everyone knows of, right? There are things that are appropriate in the workplace, in any workplace, and there are things that are not. And every industry is different. Some industries, if someone said the F word, it'd be a big deal. Other industries, it's not a big deal at all, right? You just got to figure out what's appropriate, what's not appropriate for your workplace, and then enforce, the policies thereof. Yes, sir.
How much, if you've done any studies, or if there are any studies out there linking this to the culture change in our country, with the way parents deal with their kids today as opposed to 30, 40, 50 years ago?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so emotional intelligence didn't exist, at least in the books, until the 1990s. In the 1990s, psychologists and sociologists started to realize that there was something to this emotional intelligence, and they named it EQ. I think it's generational to a certain degree. I think that millennials and Gen X, which are coming up behind the millennials, or Gen Z rather, are coming up behind the millennials, care a lot more about their emotional well-being and place a higher premium on that. So I think that's probably part of it. But I also think we're evolving as a species. And I think now we realize that there's more than just punching the clock every day and then clocking out at the end of the day and that's it, right? We want our jobs to be more meaningful, and if they're going to be more meaningful, we have to feel like people care about us and the company cares about us and what we're doing matters in the world. So I think it's all of those things kind of put together. I don't think emotional intelligence exists solely because there's a new generation. But I think whether you're the silent generation or baby boomer or Gen X or millennial or Gen Z, I think everyone benefits from a more emotionally intelligent workplace where people feel like they can express themselves, they express their ideas, so forth and so on. The worst thing is for our employees to not feel like they can admit what they don't know. Because then there's all kinds of mistakes that happen, right? If your employees don't feel like they can tell you that they don't know how to do something and that you've assigned them to do it, ooh, you better look out, because odds are they're not gonna figure it out, or they're not gonna figure it out the way that you want them to. So you've got to create that emotionally intelligent workplace. I wish we had more time, but we're short.
Okay. Good, thank you.